Hello, this is Fahad from Game Code Bytes. In this presentation, I'm going to show you how to build a sprite sheet animation using JavaScript. Now, sprite sheet animation is a common technique to animate things in 2D games. So let's get started. Now, before we start digging into the code of the sprite sheet animation, let's go to Google and just do a simple search on Google by adding or typing sprite sheet. You'll see a lot of results. This is exactly what sprite sheet looks like. You have one image, one large image that holds all of the animation, or I would say all of the animation frames for one single character probably. And sometimes you probably have a very large image that holds all of the frames, all of the animation frames for the whole game. And probably in that case, it's going to be called a atlas or something like that. Sprite atlas, something like that. So you see here, for example, Mega Man, it holds all of the animation frames here. Like, for example, when he's running or jumping or breathing and things like that. Now, as I always prefer to do, I created a simple boilerplate for the project so that you don't have to watch me create all of the folders and the files and things like that. And what I have here is 3 files: index.html, index.js, and style.css. Index.html, I'm creating the canvas element with ID canvas, and I'm referencing to the JavaScript file, which is the index.js. And the index.js is going to hold all of the logic for the sprite sheet animation, and a simple style.css file to do some stylings for the body and the canvas. And I also created a folder called assets, and within that there's a folder called images, and within that I created a simple sprite sheet image here. It's very basic. We have a character that has some states, for example, breathing, angry, and jumping. Now, first of all, we need to set up some function, create some functions so we can draw on the canvas. So I'll create a function called frame, and here I'm going to request animation frame, and I'll pass the frame as a callback. And then here I'm going to clear the rectangle, actually clearing the canvas. And then I'm going to call a function called animate, and I'll create the function animate. Now we need to understand some technical stuff about the sprite sheet image itself. So I'll go back to the sprite sheet image I created, and then let's understand some of the basic concepts in every single sprite sheet image. First of all, we need to specify what is the start index, from where exactly we want to draw. From this pixel on the X and Y axes, or maybe from here, and things like that. So we need to know exactly the frame width and what frame we want to animate, or we want to show at least. So the frame width, for example, let's say 65. So from 0 to 65 is going to be the width, and the height is going to be from 0 to 100. Now, every time we need to render this first image, we will have to specify those, let's say, data, saying, okay, I want to start from 0, width 65, and height is going to be, actually y is going to be from 0 to the height, which is going to be 100. And then every time we need to jump into the next frame, we will say the frame index by, actually it's not going to be by, we'll say frame index is going to be 2, for example. And then 2 is going to be here or here by the width, which is the frame width, which is going to be 65. So it will jump from this pixel to this pixel to this pixel, and so on. And in this scenario, we only have one row of images. We don't have multiple rows, so it's going to be a little bit more simple. And also we'll have to specify what is the scale of the image we want to use. For example, scale is going to be 1, which is 100%, or it's going to be 50%. And also we have to specify where do we want to draw that image on the canvas by providing the X and Y position. Now let's go back to the code. So here I'm going to specify some constants. So I'll say frame width is going to be 64. And I know that because I created the sprite sheet and I know exactly what is the frame width of every single image of that character or that hero. And the frame height is going to be 100. And I'm going to say X position, let's say 130. And the Y position is going to be 160. And the scale, I'll use 1 for now. I also need to specify what is the FPS, which is the frame per second, and we'll get into that later on. And also going to create a constant called seconds to update. For example, we want to update every second or 2 seconds, or maybe every 1% of a second. So let's say every single second. So FPS, 1 by FPS, which is exactly, it's going to be 1 second. And then I'm going to use counter, and we'll use that later on to animate to jump from one single frame into another frame. Now we need to go to the animate function, and we need to call context.drawImage. Now I'm going to use very simple attributes here to just show you how to draw, for example, the first frame in the sprite sheet. And we need to have a reference to the image. So I'll just call it sprite sheet. But before that, we also need to create that image. So I'll say const sprite sheet equals a new image. And then sprite-sheet.src, which is the source of the image, is going to be an assets, images, and it's called hero sprite sheet. Yes, hero sprite sheet.png. So hero underscore sprite sheet.png. Now we created the image. Now we can use this image here. Now we'll start providing the data to the draw image function so that it understands from where do we want to start drawing from the sprite sheet. So let's say draw from the first pixel on the x-axis and then from the first pixel on the y-axis. And then I want the width to be 64. And actually we can just use the frame width here. So let's just use this. And frame height. And next we need to provide the X position we want to draw on the canvas. So I'll just use X position and Y position. And then what is the desired width we want to draw on the canvas. So I'll just say frame width multiplied by the scale and frame height multiplied by the scale. Now let's run this and see if it's going to draw that frame exactly on the canvas. Okay, didn't draw anything, and we don't have any errors. And that's because we forgot to call the frame function. Let's run it. Good. Now we are able to see the first frame in the sprite sheet. Now let's try to render another image or another frame from the sprite sheet. So for example, let's say the second one. Let's go back here and see what exactly do we want. So this is going to be 0, this is going to be 1, this is going to be 2. Let's try to render this one 2. So I have to say 2 multiplied by the frame width. And on the y-axis, we don't have to worry about it because it's one row on the sprite sheet. Let's run this and see. Good. As you can see, we were able to render the second, it's not the second actually, it's the index of 2, 0, 1, 2. We were able to render this exact frame on the canvas. Now let's create a variable or a constant and call it frame index, and then we can play around with it to see how we can manipulate or actually draw based on what we want, exactly what frame we want. We're not doing anything extra, we're just putting this number into a constant. So I'll just call it frame index. And let's try number 7, for example, just some random number. And then I'll use this here, frame index 7. So let's go back here and see what do you want. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's try this 10, or maybe 11. Let's try 11, just to make sure. Good. Now let's quickly try to animate something before we create a good structure for the animation. I'm going to use this count to loop through some of the frames we have in the sprite sheet and start animating. So I'll put this back to 0, and then here I'm going to increase the counter by 1, count plus plus, and let's say if count greater than 10, I want you to increase the frame index by 1. And also you need to set the counter back to 0. Now here we'll say if frame index is greater than 4, for example, set back frame index to 0. And this should animate 4 frames in the sprite sheet image. Let's try this out. Oh, we have an error. 39 unexpected. Of course. Okay. 35 assignment to a constant, exactly, because frame index is a constant, so we need to go back here and use a variable. And let's put this back with the variables. And it's working. And to give you some sense, what is this counter doing? I'm going to reduce this number to 5, and it's going to be faster. Nice. Now let's try to increase the frame index to, for example, 12. Nice. Now I want to refactor the code a little bit so that we can have more control over what exactly we want to animate. I want to create something called state, which is the state of the player here, or the hero on the canvas. We want to generate different states. For example, I want to generate a state called breathe, and another one called angry, and another one called jump, or whatever. And then based on these states, I want to pass that state to the animate function so that it will only render what we want. So I'll create an object called state. And then within this state, I'm going to have another object called states. And then I need to create a function called generate state. Function, I'm going to pass a name and the start index and the end index. Now I want to make sure this state doesn't exist in the states object here. So I'll say if not this dot states of name, then this dot states of name equals, and create a new object within this state object. I'm going to create a frame index and set it to the start index. And also it's going to be the start index, and then end index. It's going to be the end index. Now I can do this for short. And instead of passing this here, I can just do it this way. But for clarity, let's just keep it this way. Now I also need to create another function called getState. And we need to pass a name. And I need to make sure if this state does really exist in the states object. And return this dot states of name. Good. Now let's generate some states. So I'll say state dot generate state, and I'll just call it breathe. And it's going to start from index 0 to 4. Let's do another one. Starts from 4 to 8, for example. Let's call it angry. Another one starts from 8 to 14. I'm going to call this jump. Now we need to pass the state to the animate function. So I'll just say state.get state. And for example, I wanted to breathe now. Now we should expect the state here. And also we need to refactor this to use the state rather than the one state that used to exist in the global scope here. So here we'll say state.frameIndex multiplied by the frame width, and I think that should be it. Yes, let's try this out. Okay. We also forgot to refactor this as well. So this should be state.frameIndex is greater than the state.endIndex. If so, we're going to set the state.frameIndex to state.startIndex. Okay. And also this should be state.frameIndex. Good. Now let's pass another state. For example, I want him to jump. Good. Let's use angry. And it's working. Let's go back to breathe. Nice. Now one last refactoring I think we can do is the how much update or how many updates we want based on the seconds we passed here. So I'll say if count greater than the second to update, then do that update. Let's try this out. Nice. And that's it's slow. Actually, it's slow because we're using 1 second. Let's use half second. And it's a little bit faster. Let's use 10% of the second. Nice. Now let's go back in here and animate something else. Let's say angry. Jump. Let's reduce this a little bit. Actually, not a little bit. Let's use almost 1%, I think. Yes, let's say good. All right, friends, this is going to be the end of the sprite sheet animation with JavaScript. I'll probably do more tutorials on the sprite sheet animation. Maybe we'll create more advanced system to handle multiple sprites, and we'll probably integrate that system with some game maybe in the future. If you like this one, subscribe to my channel, like the video, share it with your friends, and also stay tuned for the next one. Thank you guys for watching. This is Fahad from Game Code Bytes.